Okay. Right, well, thank you very much, everyone. This is the meeting of the Western Gateway Strategic Subnational Transport Body Board. And what I'd like to do is just to start by asking the members of the board to introduce themselves, if that's all right, please. I'll start myself as I'm Councillor Mike Green. I'm chairman of the board and I am the cabinet member for sustainability and transport at BCP Council, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. I'll just go through in the order that I've got. So Councillor David Gray.
Hello, I'm David Gray. I am the representative of Gloucestershire County Council. I'm Environment and Planning Cabinet Board member.
Thank you. And Councillor Don Alexander, please.
Good afternoon, Don Alexander, Cabinet Member for Transport in Bristol.
Councillor Don Davies.
Yeah, hi, I'm Don Davies, leader in Alsomset Council, but also the executive member for the relevant transport today. Thank you.
Thank you. We've received apologies from Councillor Dr. Mark McClellan, but he's been representing, he's being substituted today by Councillor Kevin Daly, I believe. Kevin, are you there? Not yet. Sarah, outside this, could you just make sure that he does have the link to be in here for the full
Yeah,
meeting,
I think he's
please?
having problems with his sound, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much then. Councillor Amanda Rigby, please.
Hello, I'm Councillor Amanda Rigby. I'm Cabinet Member for Transport for Bath and North East Somerset Council.
Councillor Stephen Reid.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Councillor Steve Reid. I'm Cabinet Member for Regeneration, Environment and Strategic Infrastructure at South Gloucestershire Council.
Thank you. Councillor Ray Bryan, please.
Yes, Councillor Ray Bryan, Cabinet Member for Highways, Travel and the Environment at Dorset Council.
Thank you very much. And I think that's everybody that we have. If I've not missed anyone out, if I have, please raise your hand. No, we're good on that one. So if I could just please ask everyone, when they're speaking, if you could put your camera on, that would be great. When you're not speaking, either keep your camera on or off, but if you could keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking, please. And I'm going to ask all officers to introduce themselves as and when they speak, and the same with any other guests who are making presentations today. So if I can, we've got a very, very tight agenda today, given the amount that we've got to get through. So apologies if we do rattle through it a little bit quickly, but I think that's what we're going to have to if we're not all going to be here until midnight. So looking first of all, the agenda item 2 is the minutes and actions from the previous meeting. There were 3 actions that came forward. One is the forward plan to become a dedicated agenda item, and we have that now as paper B that's being circulated to members. We asked that Councillor Amanda Rigby to replace Councillor Steve Pearce as the lead member for freight, which I believe has happened. And we've taken the strategic travel plan, transport plan engagement process offline. And again, there's an agenda item for that today, which we'll be coming to. So if that's all right, can I ask if anyone has any anything to bring up regarding the draft minutes and actions for inaccuracy? Daniel Round, please.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Round, Head of Strategic Planning from Network Rail. Just a very minor thing. You've got Andrew Wiles as your attendee as a representative of Network Rail. I don't believe he works for us. I think he's at Somerset, I believe. So if that could just be amended in the minutes, that would be great.
Thank you for pointing that one out.
Thank you.
Thank you indeed, and welcome to this. And I can see we do have Network Rail's people here today, which is we're very grateful for.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. The next item is the questions or representations from members of the public in line with the board's public participation scheme. And again, sorry to anyone who haven't seen me doing this before. The reason I look to the right is that's where my big screen is. And then I can see everything else that's going on that one. So we have had questions and we have had answers put forward for them. I don't know, Sarah, would you like just to give us, just to tell us what they're about, because they are quite long questions.
Yeah. So yes, we've had 2 sets of questions, and the full questions and answers have been published on our website, which is Western Gateway STB.org.uk. We had a question from councillors and members of the A350 Community Group Operations Committee, basically asking whether the A350 should still be within the M4 to Dorset South Coast study. And the answer indicates that all existing routes still need to be included, but the study's not yet reached any conclusions. We also had a set of questions from David Redgewell from South West Transport Network and Rail Future 7 side. Specific questions were on the electrification of various railway lines and improvements to passenger facilities, and these are answered and the paper is published, as I said. So if anybody needs to check them, they can look at that there.
Thank you very much. Do any members have anything else that they need to bring up at that one? No, thank you. In that case, we'll move on to Nuala Waters on the update on our programme, including, please, the financial update that we've had both on our programme and the notes that have come from the DFT since we last met. Nuala.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Nuala Waters, the Programme Manager for the Western Gateway STB. We are seeking a couple of decisions from the board today. In the first decision is a request to approve continued annual member contributions of 20k per annum, and to agree your respective that within your respective budgets for the next 3 years. So that's the first decision that we're seeking today, Chair.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do, if you don't mind, to introduce the whole paper, and then we'll go through and I will put the recommendations forward en bloc.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
So the other items that we're going to go through is a brief discussion on the 3-year business plan, which we need to respond to the Department of Transport. We're delighted to note that we've received a 3-year allocation from the department of approximately 2.3 million for the next 3 years. That is subject to good performance and obviously, and also agreement on scope with the department. So just to note that, which is fantastic news really for us. In terms of what that means, we obviously need to make a decision on the business plan for the next 3 years. So I've proposed to have an offline discussion with project sponsors, with the department, with our supply chain, and to assess any recent changes in strategy, particularly in the EV strategy, which has come out recently for government. And then subject to board agreement, we will put that forward in draft to senior officers at the end of this month, and then respond to the Department for Transport with that agreed business plan. In terms of other items to bring up, that also raises the point on the role of the STB, and in terms of how our delivery programme and what we're delivering. And just to note that we do need to have a confirmation from the board on if any changes to our governance is required. So we propose to hold that as an offline discussion. In terms of resourcing, it also means that we need to look at our resourcing for the STB to ensure that we deliver tangible results and benefits for our members. So we're proposing to hold a review session with our fellow STBs to see what the resourcing models are, but our primary focus will be on what additional technical staff that we require to deliver the programme for the STB. So that covers up to section 1.19 for anybody following through the papers. Other items to note on the forward work programme, we have a number of items coming forward today for key decision. Noted in the board paper that it states that there are 21-22, and this is April, so technically it's 22-23. We moved our board to March. The other items to note in terms of the project programme is we will be having a discussion on strategic transport plan today, so we will be seeking offline delegation to approve the baseline reports. other items to note, our carbon audit project is progressing. It is reporting as amber at the moment. We've had delays with additional technical information that needs to be fed into the model, but we will be on track to bring it into July board. So we'll be having a discussion with the project sponsor shortly. In terms of freight, we will be also bringing that to the board today. So I'm not going to have a discussion really on freight and strategic rail programme, if that's all right, Chair. Alternative fuels is reporting green. We've had a discussion with Midlands Connect, which was productive in how we bring forward the phase 2 element of the work for shortlisting. And there are some opportunities which we need to explore with our supply chain to make sure that that progresses in a timely fashion. In terms of the strategic cycle routes, that project again is progressing quite well, and we should be bringing that to our July board for approvals. So I think in terms of the Ford programme, that's all I wanted to raise, Chair, if that's acceptable. In terms of finances, we have reported an underspend of approximately 17k. Overall, we've reported an underspend for the STB of approximately 17k on the Western Gateway budget, which we propose to roll forward into the next financial year, if the board is, if that's acceptable to the board. The underspend reported against the DFT fund, we haven't drawn that down, so there's no repayments required with that fund, and that largely is due to conservative estimation by the programme team and delivering a value from our supply chain. So there's no particular issues to call out in terms of the finances. Sorry, Chair, you're on mute.
Oh, that schoolboy error. Sorry about that one. If I can just thank you very much for that, Nuala, and I'll just bring up a couple of items myself, if that's okay. First, I think it's worth drawing attention to 110, which talks about our role as a subnational transport body, and it begins by talking about how it is now much more important than ever, the roles that we are trying to do, and that's clearly how government is looking at us as STBs and how they reflect, and they've reflected that, put their money where their mouths are in the increased funding, which is very welcome. So they're talking about us being responsible for building and managing the strategies, and also using the strategies particularly to advise the government with respect to prioritising investment, which is very much where we want to be. When it comes to resources, with that extra money that we are getting from government, we need to use that responsibly, and it does say in the report that we are going to do that. There are other STBs, and if people are coming to the conference in May, I'm sure we'll get to hear how other people are doing it, but are rather less slender, shall we say, than we are in their officer structure. We clearly have our proposal as we go forward, as we are at the moment, is that we're not going to be looking to use the extra money to fund any more administrative posts effectively in the workings of the STB, but instead we're going to be looking at tangible and worthwhile outputs, so that additional money we see as going forward to an accelerated and potentially expanded programme of work on the projects themselves, rather than it becoming a body that's there effectively as an additional administrative level. And I'm very pleased to see the parts of the report that talk about that, and how we're looking instead, rather than looking at any more permanent staff, we're looking only at term contracts and at seconding people from the member authorities to work on particular projects. And indeed, when we look at the underspend that Nuala referred to, although it's only a small underspend of 17,000, it's worth noting that there's actually an overspend of 17,000 on project work, but an underspend of 34,000 on administration, etc. And that's the right way around as far as I'm concerned. The underspend that's come on DFT, and it's not really surprising during these times that STBs are underspending, but it is only 78,000 out of 850,000 out of their package, and being able to move that and the and our own small underspend forward is very welcome. Would any other members like to bring anything up regarding paper A? Because if not, I will move all the recommendations that you have in front of you from 1 through 7 that Nuala has already outlined. Can I get a seconder, please, for those recommendations? That's Councillor David Gray, the Vice Chairman. Yeah. Can I see if there's anybody who is against, or if not, can I assume consent on that? Yep. Thank you very much. That is passed unanimously. We'll then move on to the, and thank you very much, Nuala, for that. And the next item on the agenda is the forward plan, which is presented as paper B. We've already alluded to quite a bit of that, or Nuala has, as we've gone forward. I'd just like to thank you particularly. This is a recommendation we had at the last meeting, that we should have a very simple way of looking at our work programme with a RAG status. And that's exactly what this is, and I think it's set out in exactly the way that I would have hoped. And I don't know whether any other members have any comments, or whether we're content to say thank you for getting it into this, and it is noted. Super. Thank you very much then. Moving on then to the next item on the agenda, which is updates from associate members. First of all, I know that Network Rail may be joining us anyway in the form of David Tunley, but I'd have to say the paper that came through with the update that came through to members, which we've all had the opportunity to go forward to consider beforehand, that was put together by Daniel Round, I think is really comprehensive, really readable, and very, very helpful in the way that it's done. So Daniel, if you're still with us, thank you very much for putting that together. Really works for us.
Thank you, Chair. Team effort to do it, so I'll feed that back to the team, but glad that it's of use. Thank you ever so much.
It is a very, very good use. Thank you again. So we do have some verbal updates if they are here for us. I have, is David Glynas here today?
I am, I'm here.
Hey, there you are, Mr. iPhone. Thank you very much, and welcome, David. Really appreciate, as ever, you coming along, and the direct interest that you take in the STB, and I hope we're able to do you and the DFT proud as we go forward.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for your fantastic visit down to Bournemouth on Wednesday. It's a shame that you couldn't make it, but it was a great day.
You would not have wanted me there, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But thank you indeed for coming to it, and I've had all the reports on it, so I really appreciate it. And even I see Julian's got his thumbs up there as well. So,
good.
Do you have some stuff for us today, David?
Yeah, so I can give a quick update on some of the key news. As always, this is not an exhaustive list of everything which has come out of DFT or government over the last few weeks or months, but it just gives you a few highlights of some of the key announcements which have been made. So starting off, people would have picked up earlier this week on Monday, there was an announcement that 31 areas in the country have been chosen to receive funding for their BSIPs over the next 3 years. Transport directors have received a letter on that, and receiving them informing them of the outcome. There's obviously unsuccessful places, there's very successful places, and a few in the middle. But hopefully you've all received the letters on that. Also on Monday, actually, there was the announcement of that 7 city regions would get a multi-year consolidated transport settlement for this particular region. That basically meant WECA, and WECA was successful in securing a large amount of money, £540 million of capital investment for the next 5-year period, running to 26-27. So that was very good news for the West of England Combined Authority region. As I'm also sure people have picked up at the spending review, at the spring statement, announcement was made on the round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund. So that is now live. That is, of course, led by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and applications need to be submitted by the 6th of July. So obviously, if you've got any schemes, including nice transport schemes, get those in, and hopefully we'll be able to get some funding out to at least some local authorities in the southwest in the forthcoming in the following months. Other news: electric vehicle infrastructure strategy was released a week or so ago. As part of this, just to make you aware of this, you can look on the website for further details on what that actually includes. But as part of this, importantly, there's going to be a local EV infrastructure fund, which will provide approximately 400 million of capital and 50 million of resource funding to local authorities. And that's to work with industry and transform the availability of charging for drivers without off-street parking. Again, applications are sought, and they need to be in by the 17th of June. Other stuff, Active Travel England, that was a little bit a while ago now. That was back in January. So there's an announcement about, we announced that Active Travel England would be set up, and it's a new executive agency of the department. ATE will provide training and support to local authorities so that they can deliver ambitious and transformational schemes. In regards to that, the ATE Active Travel England Spatial Planning Team has also published a stakeholder survey, and that's seeking views on Active Travel England's role as a centre of excellence for planning for active travel infrastructure. That survey closes next week on the 13th of April. So if you get a chance, feed into that, please. Zebra, so that's a zero mission for zero mission buses. There was an announcement on the 26th of March. There was a £200 million. That £200 million of funding will help deliver almost 1,000 green buses across England. So that's a start. Unfortunately, I don't think there were any successful applicants in the southwest, but there's no indication there will be. But hopefully there will be further competitions down the line on that, so we can get some of those nice new green buses in the southwest as well. And finally, as Nuala mentioned earlier, fantastic news that we were able to confirm Western Gateway's 3-year funding allocation. I think that's a real indication of the support that subnational transport bodies have now got from ministers at DfT. It gives you certainty over the next 3 years, which you certainly haven't had before. The next step, of course, is now to agree a business plan for us for the new financial year, 22-23, and give us a flavour of what you are proposing to do in the next 2 years. You've got a lot to do, I think it's fair to say, because there's a lot of work to be mopped up from the 21-22 financial year. And of course, the 22-23 financial year is an increase in funding. So it's going to be a very busy period, not only for Western Gateway, but for other STBs as well. But really exciting news on that, and really looking forward to working alongside you to deliver some great outputs.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And indeed, thank you and the DfT for all the support you do give us as an STB. I said earlier in paper A that I think it is a reflection of how DfT is working so well with the STBs that we've been able to see this increase in funding, and we will make sure that the money is well spent. It will be spent on projects, and it will be spent on the projects that matter, and in conjunction with DfT. We will be able to prioritise. And thankfully, we've now got more that we can prioritise due to that additional funding. For those of us that did get some money on Bus Back Better, again, thank you for that. I know you will have a mixed range amongst the members of Western Gateway as to how that's gone and who the beneficiaries have been, but particularly for the authorities that have the urban areas which have got the real congestion problems. I think that's going to be most welcome, and hopefully we could be looking at different funding down the road, but this will give us the opportunity in some of those congested areas to start putting in bus priority measures with the large capital expenditures that those involve. I'm looking forward to going through the EV strategy. I haven't yet, and how much of those capital funds we might be able to use here in the Western Gateway region. Having travelled the length of the Western Gateway Subnational Transport Body and myself a couple of weeks ago when we went up to Bath, there is a varying availability of electric vehicle charging points as you go up that way, and it would be good to see a more comprehensive network, and I hope that funding is going to reflect the need to have some charging available in the connecting areas rather than the destination points. And certainly those of us in the more urban areas are able to get at least some funding from our commercial partners to be able to put up to provide a greater array of chargers for those that aren't able to charge at home, or indeed who visit the areas. But there are others I know that aren't able to, and if we are to ensure that everyone knows that they are going to be able to charge when they need to, then I think that's going to be a significant move up. Even having planned my route completely, I still had the range anxiety going up that way in our old electric one. So again, thank you very much for everything. Those were the points that I wanted to bring out. Do any other members have any questions or comments they'd like to put to David? Ray.
It'll come as no surprise that
Hello.
I withstood. Hi, David. I was less pleased than you were, Mike, on the allocation of funding, and to say I was incensed is an understatement. I have requested a meeting with Baroness Via to discuss this, because I think it was sad news for Dorset. And just to clarify something, David, we welcomed you down into Southeast Dorset because we were able to show you some of the good work we've already achieved, and some of the good work that we're in the process of finishing. So thank you and your team for coming. I found it very interesting and was very, very happy to welcome you to my area of Dorset, which is slightly bigger than just Bournemouth. But I'll let Mike win on that one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think actually that one point, if I could just bring that out, that comes from what you've just said there. We are, all of our authorities, either via Western Gateway or will particularly within the own authorities, reliant very much on the funding that's coming from DFT. We all have political difficulties in implementing some of the measures that have been put forward, and particularly on active travel. And if we are going to take that on, and I believe that we have to take that on, it's very, very good to know that the DFT have got our back. And I would encourage other authorities to ensure that you also show DFT how you are delivering delivering on their objectives, which should be, and in our case certainly are, joint objectives. It's one thing to go knocking on doors. It's another thing in 20 years' time when we're going to be able to look back and show that we've been able to make a difference to the way that people travel around our areas. So thank you very, very much for that. Thanks. If we don't have any more questions for David, so thank you for that. And can we move on to, I understand we've got the other David Tunley from Network Rail to talk about this sector of the business plan.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Mike, and to everybody on the line. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is David Tunley. I work for Network Rail's Wales and Western region, where I look after our long-term business planning. And my colleague Daniel Round, who is a long-standing attendee at this session has provided his written update from associate member. We just thought we'd take a few minutes to make members aware of the work that we're doing as part of our periodic review settlements. So Network Rail, in common with other regulated utilities, is funded for its core operations, maintenance and renewals expenditure on a series of 5-yearly control periods through a periodic review process that is managed by ORR and the Office of Rail and Road. And we are in flight now with that process for our funding for what we would call control period 7, which starts on the 1st of April 2024. So Network Rail will be working very hard with stakeholders and others over the next few months to develop our strategic business plan, which will ultimately be submitted through to ORR for their review and scrutiny in February of 2023, and that will respond to the DfT's high-level output specification and their statement of funds available, which we expect to be released from DfT in the early part of the autumn. In terms of the stakeholder engagements that we've been doing, we've been working closely with officers from your authorities. We've held two rounds of stakeholder engagement workshops already during the latter part of the autumn. Last year, we've done some passenger research working with transport folks as well, and have got a further calendar of stakeholder engagement workshops at officer level planned, the next one being in a few weeks, so just over a month's time in May as we develop our plans. The core themes that are coming through from the engagement that we've done so far and from the passenger research is clearly the need for affordability within the plan and making sure that we're delivering value for money, the importance of the core punctuality and reliability of the train service, but an increasing focus on environmental issues, environmental sustainability, responding to the challenges of climate change and making sure that we are adapting the infrastructure to be more resilient under those circumstances, as well as taking the action that we need to do to make sure that we're making our own contribution towards net zero, particularly for our own activities. The work that we're doing as part of CP7 runs in parallel to the work that the Great British Railways transition team are doing, developing the whole industry strategic plan, on which they did a call for evidence that engaged yourselves and other interested parties from across the country just a few months ago. And that's where broader proposals for wider weather resilience and climate change adaptation and decarbonisation of traction will be taken forward. So I'll just pause there because I know that you're tight for time, but we just wanted to make members aware of what we're doing, make you aware of the engagement that we've already held with your officers. We're very grateful to their time and their contribution to that, and we'll be carrying on that discussion over the next few months as we go through the process to develop our strategic business plan.
Thank you very much indeed, David. We're all very conscious of what an important partner Network Rail is. And I don't know whether you're aware, just reading through some of the notes that we've had, we have appointed amongst ourselves as board members, lead members who are looking at particular elements of it. And although he's not here today, Councillor Mark McLennan from Wiltshire is our lead member for rail. If you haven't spent some time with him, maybe could ask you to do so, possibly James or somebody might be able to put that together and to go from there.
That would be very kind. Thank you. I'll be in touch with James afterwards.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Nula's thumbs up on that, so she may be able to assist in setting that up as well. Do any members have questions for David? No, in that case, we'll look forward to seeing the business case as it develops, and hopefully to be able to support you in doing so. And again, thank you very much for bringing it forward to us today, and indeed for the work that we do alongside you.
That's great. Thanks so much. Take
Thank
care,
you
everybody.
very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Okay, if we then move on to the paper C, which is the subject of rural mobility, and we have a strategy to hopefully adopt and approve on that one. Before I go into it, or before the officers do, we have a lead member on rural mobility, which is Councillor Ray Bryan. Ray, would you like to introduce this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say we recognise the current approach to rural mobility has not worked for many of our local communities, and the challenges they face from the lack of access to everyday services are extremely real. This is why we need the rural mobility strategy and why we commissioned WSP to work with us to undertake this joint study with the Peninsula STB to cover the whole of the southwest of England. WSP's work identifies the challenges faced by rural areas and those with the most urgent transport needs, and the strategy's vision and approach to transform rural mobility, improve access to local services, and decarbonise transport is greatly welcomed. The strategy demonstrates how our shared vision of improved rural mobility is crucial for helping the economy as well as meeting decarbonisation goals. We look forward to continuing our collaborative work with the Peninsula STB in recommending pilot projects which, subject to funding and working with partners, will be trialled across our region. We've got a number of recommendations that we're going to bring forward, but I'm going to pass over to James to talk about the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm James White. I'm one of the technical leads for the Western Gateway STB, and I've been project managing this rural mobility strategy. I haven't got much more to add because we've got Pete Ramsey from WSP to give a presentation on the work that's been undertaken. I think I would just like to flag up that there is an awful lot of work has gone on behind this piece of work, and there's something like 400 plus pages of technical work behind the strategy, but Pete will also pick up on the evidence side as well. So if I may, Chair, I'll pass over to Pete to give his presentation.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Pete.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everyone can see my presentation. Does that come up on the screen now? Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks so much. So, yeah, my name is Peter Ramsey. I was the WSP project manager for this commission. Just started about 6 months ago. So I'll try and be brief. I realise I've only got 15 minutes, so I'll make a start. So, as James mentioned, this is a kind of single unified approach across both STBs, but we've been very mindful to recognise that there are differences between rural areas, between Western Gateway and Peninsula. The focus is on rural, but it's on coastal too. So those coastal areas away from the major urban centres, but we also consider remoteness as well. So we consider the variation between kind of those near urban rural areas and those which are very much more remote, away from urban centres, much less connected, particularly those actually within the peninsula. There's few of those locations in Western Gateway. The overall aim has been to support the levelling up agenda, and we've very much taken a people, place and activity based approach, so starting with an understanding of the places within the southwest, the people who live there and the activities they undertake, and then using that analysis to understand the challenges they face within our rural and coastal places. As already mentioned, we've focused particularly on those places most in need, those places that have less affluence and are less well connected. We've considered the major changes, whether those be global, regional, national or local, that it might affect our rural and coastal places, and the new technologies that are starting to come forward that might influence rural mobility. We have identified a set of bundles of mobility interventions that can be brought together and trialled and tested in a number of pilots within the rural context, and we've developed some high-level business cases to set out various elements of those pilots. Just a bit of a background. So this is very much the first subnational rural mobility strategy in England. So very much pushing forward across for the southwest. Other work has been done on other STBs to date on rural, particularly in Midlands Connect, but this is the first rounded future mobility strategy to be delivered. We've analysed 1,400 rural places across the southwest, from rural towns, villages, hamlets, down to those areas outside of of settlements. And as James mentioned, we have kind of 4 supporting technical documents amounting to about 400 pages of analysis, so might help you get to sleep at some point in due course. We've talked to rural businesses, residents, really to understand their specific needs. So it's not just being us working in isolation at our desks. We've talked to rural businesses, residents and wider stakeholders about their experiences in rural places. We've also looked at the good practice that's already happening in the southwest. There's already many good things happening already, but also looked at best practice across the UK and globally as well. We've identified 6 potential future rural scenarios, from some very aspirational ones to ones potentially that might reflect potential for future decline, but helping to shape the future of our rural places. We've identified and assessed over 100 different potential proposals, and we've developed a lot of new thinking as part of our proposals for the strategy. And hopefully that will come out as you read the document. So we have a vision, so I won't go through this in detail, but we have an overall vision for rural mobility. So by 2040, rural mobility will have been transformed. We'll have transformed physical and digital connectivity and accessibility, levelling up our countryside and coastal communities. We have a set of objectives as well underpinning that vision, but also we've developed a broader framework for rural mobility. A 10-point framework, so building on strong digital connectivity to support e-commerce and online services, enabling people to do more without the need to travel, building and supporting more local services within communities, reducing the number and length of journeys that people need to make, integrating activity and mobility within our rural communities, particularly focusing on mobility and rural hubs. Importantly, the concept we've brought particularly to this strategy is the 30-minute rural communities. So building on the 15-minute city concept that's been around for quite a while, but broadening that out into our rural communities where individual settlements work together in networks, sharing resources, sharing facilities, but with better intra-rural connectivity between them. Importantly, we think that the focus of rural mobility should be on decarbonised, active, publicly available and shared mobility. But we do realise that realistically, cars and vans will remain vital to many journeys within our rural areas. But importantly, sharing those vehicles and electrifying those vehicles will be vital to particularly helping meet our net zero commitments. We also think that strengthening our larger rural settlements will be key to ensuring they continue to be the strong drivers of social, environmental and economic change and sustainable development within our rural areas, and being really a focus for those 30-minute rural communities. But where we can't deliver everything within our rural communities, having those stronger, better strategic connections to our larger urban areas by inter-urban bus, coach and rail. Importantly, we think stronger cross-sectoral partnerships and funding will be key to delivering this framework, so across the public, private and third sectors. And finally, it's important to support the resilience of our mobility networks, particularly focusing on including generation and security of our energy networks. This is kind of a pictorial example of that framework. So you can see these networks of communities working together, each having slightly different facilities, but with better intra-rural mobility, sharing those facilities and communities working together within those kind of 30-minute travel times. As I mentioned earlier, we've reviewed over 100 different potential interventions. We've prioritised those against the objectives and the vision we've developed, but also against deliverability. So we have to be realistic of what could be delivered within our rural places. We've taken 60 of those interventions, particularly those focusing on mobility services and infrastructure, and prior to those into different bundles for different types of places. So that's been developed through an assessment of those interventions and their ability to meet the needs of different people in different types of rural place. So we've got a bundle that focuses on villages, on hamlets, isolated dwellings, and on the larger rural towns. And those really will form the basis for those pilots. So a typical example of one of those bundles. So we've got the inter-urban bus service as a key link. It links to the larger urban centres. Community being quite central to the bundle, so delivering community bus services, car services in deliveries, but also more modern and kind of future mobility focused interventions are things like rural hubs and mobility hubs, dynamic demand responsive transport, e-cargo bike provision, different types of car clubs, plus public sector service digitalisation and mobility as a service with mobility credits. But these different bundles will vary from scale of settlement, from location where those settlements are. And actually, when we come to look at particular pilots, we'll need to take account of what's already being delivered there and what's realistic for a particular local place. We also have a range of other wider proposals to support those bundles. As part of the engagement on the draft strategy, clearly a significant desire to have improved, better active travel infrastructure, but also long-standing issues around road safety improvements, supporting the key tourism-related sector, but mitigating some of the impacts they have on local areas. The potential for low-level air freight has already been trialled in the southwest, but supported by behaviour change, so encouraging people to make better and different choices. But those could help form part of those bundles. But outside of the bundles, also looking to support better use of railways, including new services and stations. Again, much of which has already been happening in the southwest. Importantly, the electrification of publicly available and shared modes, have a potential for freight on passenger transport, so on the railways and on bus services and demand responsive transport, but also in some locations potentially going back to passenger on freight transport. So I know some places across the UK looking at bringing back post buses and similar systems to that, but also being open to automation. So the potential for automation to play a role in the future of rural mobility and looking for opportunities to trial and test that. There are also some policy proposals, so building that 30-minute rural communities approach into wider policy, rural proofing, local authority mobility policies and strategies, that investment in market towns already mentioned. Importantly, making new developments in rural areas sustainable, so encouraging right from the outset sustainable travel patterns, supporting rural neighbourhood planning, potentially as a starting point for rural communities to help to deliver and operate rural mobility services, as already happens in some locations, and potentially working towards a minimum standard for community services in our rural areas and a potential for a universal basic level of accessibility for rural areas. So not just provision of mobility services themselves, but potential for services provided online or actually mobile services moving into rural areas and providing services and accessibility that way. We have identified a range of priority locations. So across those 1,400 different places we've looked at, we've identified all the rural and coastal settlements and areas outside of settlements across the southwest. We've classified them in terms of scale, whether they're rural or coastal, whether they're remote. We started off with 23 different place types, but actually then expanded those when thinking about how affluence, taking account of different levels of affluence within our rural places, come up to 40 different place types. And I suppose even that's an aggregation really of a wide variety of different places we have in the southwest. So we've prioritised those places, looking at affluence and looking at the differing levels of both digital and physical connectivity. And we've selected 7 types of higher priority locations to focus, particularly focusing on levels of affluence and those less connected places. But we did exclude some places from a shortlist, those with few individual locations within those types, really to focus on the pilots on locations which would provide wider examples of locations where we could deliver bundles of interventions. So we do have some priority locations already to focus those pilots on. And here's just the examples of those 7 priority locations. As you might see, there's a few more in the peninsula area than there are in the Western Gateway. That is a reflection on generally rural areas in the peninsula are slightly less affluent than Western Gateway, but also less connected and less accessible than many of the locations in the Western Gateway. But you can see there are some of those priority locations within this area. So the pilots, we were charged with looking for up to 6 different types of pilots, really these to test and trial those bundles of services and infrastructure proposals. And we looked at different ways to identify those pilots, looking at those priority settlements, looking at how different types of place could come together. So either looking at individual settlements or networks of settlements in that 30-minute rural community approach, looking at how different local authority boundaries might work. So doing pilots within one local authority area or across boundaries. So two rural local authorities working together, or two authorities, one urban and one rural, working together, and see how that dynamic works with different bundles of interventions. And finally, looking at which sector could lead the pilots, whether that could be the public sector led by local authorities, could it be the private sector, or could the community sector, communities work to deliver bundles of interventions. And the final slide, so this penultimate slide, so we came up with these 6 different potential pilots. So 2 community-led, 1 community-led looking at a single settlement, 1 looking at a network of settlements, 3 potential for local authorities, all looking at kind of networks of settlements, I think, or 1 looking at a single local authority, 1 looking at a trial or pilot across 2 local authorities, but both being rural, and the other looking across a rural and an urban authority boundary. And then finally, a potential pilot for what could be private sector led across a single local authority boundary. And then just for the final slide, so just the some next steps to help to deliver those pilots. So vitally important to secure the funding to support those pilots, but also work with key stakeholders across the Southwest to generate interest and support to run those pilots. To then agree the areas to which to focus the pilots within, so taking those priority locations, identifying which of the specific locations within those types of area we could focus on, developing a prospectus for those pilots which to more broadly engage, and to launch a competition for partners to come forward with expressions of interest to run those and develop those pilots. The successful expressions would result in being given seed corn funding and consultancy support to develop 4 bids for funding, and then the final selection of those pilots by the STBs. So yes, a very quick run through all the work we've been doing over the last 6 months, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight to what we've been doing.
Thank you, it very much does, Pete, and thanks to you, and also to James for his oversight on this. And it really is a rural mobility, certainly for those of us that live and represent urban places. We don't sort of think about it in the way that is brought out in the report sometimes. I mean, I can see from the strategy itself, we've pretty much here in Western Gateway, we've pretty much got a rural settlement for every day of the year. I think 359 you bring out, and more than a quarter of our population live in those rural communities, and it's even more than that, obviously, in the peninsular side of it. I would be really keen to ensure that we don't, if you like, on this, get swallowed up in any way by the peninsula, and just to ensure that the Western Gateway gets its proper proper slice of the pie, as it were. I think it's really important. You spoke about priority locations a lot, Pete, and I think we just need to be absolutely clear. We're not talking there about priority locations. We're talking about location types, aren't we? At the moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're not saying it's that spot. We're saying these 20 communities are all of that sort of type, and we may well, when you reduce those down from the 40 to the 27 to the 6, be looking for pilots out of one of those 20 type arrangements. And I look forward to seeing those coming forward as we do so. But yeah, I think it's really important that we do differentiate that and make sure people that this is not a done deal. Which the pilot site, there are going to be competitions to go for them. I'm going to bring in the others in a sec, but I just wanted to also thank Ray in this. This is exactly how I certainly visualised lead members working. Your strategy is 99 pages. There are obviously others behind it as well. Very few of us are able to go through that in real detail. And to do it, you can do it in one, but you can't do it right the way across the board. and to have a lead member who is able to work with officers, work with consultants on this as we push forward, I think is of real value to us, and it gives me confidence as a board member that one of the other board members has got my back on it, and that nothing's going to slip through the gaps. So that's more towards officers. I'd like to say that, because I think this is the way that it works really well, and I know we're going to have exactly the same to say when it comes to the next item on the agenda as well. Before we go to the recommendations, etc., I've got Councillor Reid and also Councillor Davies. Councillor Reid, Steve.
Thank you. I think Don had his hand up first, but unless Don wishes to jump forward. But anyway, I'll keep going unless he shouts. Yes, I would also like to thank Ray for stepping forward. You know, as the member lead, very much appreciated, Ray, and thank you for that. Pete, having listened to what you've just said, I've picked up a few points. These are in order that I heard them, not necessarily in order of priority. You used the word affluence, and you've used it quite frequently. You're obviously aware that affluent areas can have pockets of mobility deprivation. So we mustn't discount an affluent area without due regard. And as you know, the conversation Mike and yourself had just a moment ago, I think that's probably addressed that, because these are types, not locations. 1,400 rural places analysed. I'd actually like to see the list, or see a plan of the list. You know, something to see how widespread that was. So if that list could be shared with us, that would be much appreciated. Because you said you'd spoken to residents. Unless I've missed it, I haven't heard of any residents in South Gloucestershire having been spoken to. I've probably missed it. So we'll leave that thought. The tone of some of the document seemed to infer that one of the solutions is to actually reduce the need for travel, but the danger of that, I see, is actually that can lead to isolation within the rural areas, because it is the travel which gets people out and about and meeting other human beings. I've always been a bit concerned about rural isolation. You referred to focusing on and strengthening in strong rural areas. That again tends to concentrate on the small country towns and the like, and potentially, unless I misinterpreted it again, misses the risk to the hamlets of this world. Within South Gloss, we've got a push for mobility hubs. Now, within WECA, mobility hub has a particular definition. In my world, it has a different definition, and that is basically it's in the label. It's a hub, and it could be a hub of a bus and a train, an e-scooter, and whatever. I'm not hard and fast with it. It's a mobility hub, and one of the areas we are looking at is, because the bus services need to be viable, quite often you cannot serve the rural areas with a bus, and we're looking at, in quotes, the Uber type transport for some of our residents. Next point, I can't disagree with the aspirations. I don't think any of us can actually disagree with the aspirations. You used the phrase of rural proofing, and you used, in that context, you mentioned the local authorities. I saw Peter Mann is on the call today. I think this should apply to WECA, the combined authority as well, and we should make it explicit that it and Peter may or may not choose to come back on that one. We must be inclusive. It mustn't just be the local authorities. And my last point, the trials which now I understand where you're coming from, are somewhat bigger than I thought they were going to be. I'm wondering what is the timescales for feedback from the trials, so that we can actually make use of the information gained within our other work packages. And I'm thinking particularly in my area, and Don's possibly for that matter. We've all got local plans we're producing, and some of this information that will come out of these trials is actually very important to our local plan thinking. So thank you very much, Pete. Very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. What I'm going to do, obviously there are a number of points which were made there, and I think we should make sure they're all noted. There are a couple that I just suggest that we make sure we get to the bottom of here. First of all, shake your head or something if it's not the case. My assumption was that local authorities would include WECA. Seeing no one disagreeing with that, yeah, I see Nuala nodding, so that's great. And are we able, just, we're obviously very tight for time today, but are we, Pete, able to give just a very quick indication on what the timescale would be for the feedback? As I said, there are a number of authorities, as Steve points out, that are going through their local plan processes at the moment and the development of it. And it could indeed be influential on them if there were to be a significant change due to do with rural mobility.
Yeah, I think the absolute key point first is to secure for funding for the pilots. Once we have the funding clear, there's a process to go to secure which pilots go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, Pete. I don't think that was the point. I think it was if the pilots are give us an indication about how we want to do something much more widespread, that in itself will affect a number of local plans. So when do we expect to get the information back on the results of the pilots, not the selection of them, but the results of them, so that we can look at whether they can be used in a wider context?
Once the pilots actually start, clear as a process to get to the starting point, then you'd expect the pilots to operate for at least a year to generate the understanding of what's working and what's not.
So we're talking about something then that probably, sorry to interrupt again, that we probably won't be even starting to analyse the results until 24, 25, something like that.
Potentially in terms of final outputs, but the key thing about delivering pilots is that you learn as you go along. So that can be early, even in terms of developing the pilots, there's learning at that stage as well. Before you even launch them, there's a learning process to go through, and we can learn at that point as well. And as you actually launch and operate them, there's learning potentially at any point during the course of the pilot. But clearly the final learnings would come at the end as well.
Thank you. I think the key point on that for Steve and for some of the others in a similar situation is whether it's likely to influence or could be used to influence their local plans. And it sounds to me as though, broadly speaking, the answer to that is probably no, because the local plan timescale is probably going to be behind that, ahead of when we start to get meaningful results coming through.
Could I just add that one of the key aspects of the pilots is to understand what is a commercially viable and a sustainable model. So clearly a pilot needs to run for a certain period of time to understand that it is viable in the longer term.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to have Don and then David. We're going to need to push through a little bit quick if we can now, please.
I'll be quite quick on this if I could. I really thought that the paper was very, very thought-provoking. I think perhaps there are some issues around it, but there's very simple ones around digital connectivity in rural areas, which often is very poor. And I think for this to work, it needs to be far better, because we aren't going to be able to get people to tell where they need to go if they haven't got the digital connectivity. So I think that's a key driver. I was really pleased that you mentioned post buses. For the challenge within North Somerset that I've put out is around, there is a hell of a lot of transport out there in the rural areas related to the public sector. Post buses being one of them, but school transport, meals on wheels, social care. So we need to be really creative moving forward in how we have multi-use vehicles that can deliver a lot of those things at the same time. And I don't think enough work has yet been done on how we actually analyse what we've got out there in terms of movements and how we're better able to utilise that. I mean, a lot of us are looking to re-equip with electric vehicles, for example. So do we need to make sure the specifications of those are much more multi-use? You know, why Meals on Wheels vehicles can't act as transport vehicles, I really don't know, for example. I think the final point is the psychological one, is we need to get out there very, very soon the idea that rural mobility is going to be different, i.e. isn't going to be the 57 bus coming down the road. It's going to be different. We are moving you around, but we're going to move you around in a way that's going to work. And the old systems don't work because there isn't sufficient mass or money or whatever to have that service. And so I think we need to get the terminology very clear around mobility and make sure people don't think there's going to be a new bus service coming down their road, because we can't afford to do that to deliver this. And I think it's to get that on the idea I think Stephen's referred to in terms of hubs, the idea of interchanges, so that the whole way of moving people needs to be very explicitly different. And I'll be quiet now.
I thank you. Well, I'm glad you weren't actually, Don, because that's I think those are put in words some really important points that we can put forward. And Pete, unless you want to come back because you don't agree with any of that, can I just assume that you do, and we'll be taking that forward? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. David Gray, please.
Yeah, I also thought it's very thought-provoking and interesting piece of work, and the idea of the pilots is great, but I think there's a sort of a key part, which is you can't pilot some of the solutions because they are at the planning level in terms of, you know, how we plan, where we put new developments, how we plan where schools are located, how we plan where medical facilities are located. What you can pilot is if you like, the wiring, but not the sort of the hubs themselves, because those are outside the scope of what we're doing. So I think when we come forward in the future with proposals and pilots and all the rest of it, we need to address that need for wider structural joining up, which isn't necessarily about piloting a electric bus or a call system. It is about how we engage across geography to develop rural communities in a way that is sustainable. You picked up the point, but it's sort of outside the scope of what we're going to be able to do in terms of piloting, but it's very important that is part of the outcome of the work.
Thanks, David. I mean, again, personally, I hope the answer is going to be yes on that, Pete, that it will be within the scope. But is there something you'd like to come back on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's almost two levels to the proposals within the strategy. There's those which we think can be piloted, so predominantly around kind of services, so trying different types of mobility services. There's some infrastructure elements there, so mobility hubs to a certain extent where they can be delivered relatively quickly as part of a trial. But then there's the underlying and broader issues, so those policy elements that I presented on, those are much more widespread. They're longer term to deliver. They're part of policy documents, are part of how we actually set out our broader framework for rural mobility. But that means cross-sectoral working. It means cross-sectoral funding, and getting our policies in economics and in land use planning right as well. So economics and land use planning and transport and mobility all work together.
Thank you very much. I think that's very well put. So in that case, I don't know, Ray, would you like to move the recommendations that we've got on our papers, and I'll second them?
Very happy to do so.
In that case, if we can, we'll move those as a block, if that's all right, then, and they're proposed and seconded. Again, if I can just see that there is no dissent from that. I've got thumbs up and nods, etc. So we'll take those as passed unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks to all those that have been involved in this one. Moving on then to the next paper, which is on the freight strategy. And this, again, we have a lead member who's been working alongside the officers In this case, it's Manda. Manda Rigby, I know that you're having some difficulties in connectivity, so I won't ask you to put your camera on, but if you could speak to this, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Manda.
And thank you, Chair. Yes, you either get to see me or hear me, so I'm going with hearing me for now. I really want to be very brief in introducing this and pay a lot of credit to the officers who I think have come up with a superb document for us to look at and adopt as policy. There is going to be a slight amendment to what we're asking you to adopt, but I'll let Ewan explain that when he does his presentation. I think this is something that, again, not dissimilar to the previous paper. We're making huge strides about understanding how best we can come together as a group, as in Western Gateway, and address these issues, because that is the power and the benefit of having these groups. It's that between us, we can actually achieve far more than we could do all working separately. So I was delighted to see the paper when I was presented to it. I made absolutely no changes or comments, other than the fact that I think as a group, we tend to hide our light under the bushel a little bit. And I feel that we should communicate to the outside world slightly more some of the great steps that we're taking at some of the gateways where we're making decisions and adopting some of these policies. So with all that said, I hope I haven't built you up too much. I'll hand over to you and to present the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rigby. I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to give a very short presentation. I'm conscious of time. We've inevitably run over a little bit. Can you now see my screen?
Yeah, we can now. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a very short background as to why the STB is producing a freight strategy, the methodology that was used to develop the strategy, and some of the data sources that we looked at, the proposals within it, and some of the key recommendations. Okay. So I'm just going to move that over. So why an STB strategy for freight? When we were developing this, we were very much aware that freight quite often is left to the private sector just to get on with, for a number of reasons, usually because of commercially sensitive information and a lack of transparency with respect to data. It's quite challenging to plan in an optimal way for freight in a very competitive market, and there's certainly scope for the public sector to intervene and to try and increase that efficiency. There's a lack of collaboration quite often leads to suboptimal outcomes. You have things that potentially would not be delivered because of that commercial sensitivity. And STBs have a unique opportunity to take a regional view and get together and convey agreed regional priorities to government and to the key agencies like National Highways and Network Rail through a cohesive and joined up strategy. The strategy provides an opportunity to put forward a multimodal package of interventions that could improve freight efficiency, reduce journey times, reduce congestion, reduce emissions, and support growth. Sorry, my slides are just taking a few minutes to change. So what is this? This is the first joint freight strategy for the whole southwest of England. We've worked in partnership with our colleagues in Peninsular Transport in the same fashion as the Rural Mobility Study. And it's been developed by our colleagues at AECOM, who have led on developing the strategy for us. Freight tends to view the southwest as a single region. They don't really recognise STB boundaries. So it made a lot of sense for us to collaborate with our colleagues in Peninsula. It reduces duplication, and it also brings together the private and public sector stakeholders, which view freight as on a regional basis. And as I said, they're not really cognizant of the STB boundaries. And this approach has been generally favoured by government and the key agencies like National Highways and Network Rail. It aligns the really quite diverse areas within the southwest. The previous paper talked about different degrees of affluence, different degrees of types of settlement. So this tries to bring together all of the various types of settlements within the southwest and provide a cohesive approach. And it sets out a vision and strategy for up to 30 years. So it's a long-term, high-level strategy, but it's very much based on rigorous analysis of data. So just some of the very high-level findings, which I'll skip through very quickly, it just relates to the types of commodities and the different characteristics of the region. Things like quarrying provide raw materials across the UK, quite often going from the southwest, quarried in the southwest to the southeast. for manufacture of construction. The strategy has found that looks like there's a very strong case for expanding the proportion of freight to be moved by heavy rail and to generally generate a mode shift away from long distance road haulage for bulk goods. There's a number of benefits attributed to this. Obviously, that would lead to less congestion on the fragmented strategic road network, which is less developed in the southwest. There's scope for reducing environmental damage caused by huge HGV numbers, and generally improve efficiency and optimal operation within the private sector. There's identified the opportunity for a number of inter-terminal rail freight terminals, and ultimately to reduce empty running HGV traffic, of which apparently 22% of HGV journeys on the strategic road network are empty running. So that's nearly a quarter of journeys is very inefficient operation. So there's a significant opportunity to collaborate, provide that middle ground between public and private sector and try and reduce that. So onto the methodology very quickly. So Jeff and his team at AECOM undertook a significant analysis of a wide range of data sources, one particularly large data set provided by central government. They've evaluated a number of case studies across different modes. And we undertook significant stakeholder engagement. First of all, one-to-one interviews with several key stakeholders from different international gateways, public and private sector. We held 2 online workshops with over 60 participants. The first was to gauge issues and options. The second was to present a list of potential interventions. And eventually, once some of those interventions had been prioritized, there was then a stakeholder questionnaire that every participant was able to fill in. After that stage, the AECOM team developed interventions in partnership with officers and members. We've then undertaken a process of feeding back through local authority members, STB officers, and a DFT peer review. This is where I will point out that National Highways and Network Rail have been involved in the workshops to date, but Councillor Rigby Councillor Rigby mentioned that there's a slight alteration to the recommendation, and that relates to the fact that National Highways and Network Rail have not seen the final draft, and that's due to a little oversight on our part, but we've agreed a way forward with that. But DFT provided significant feedback, and we have incorporated that into the final draft strategy. Let's move on to my next slide. So the number of key facts here in this infograph, I won't read them all out. It highlights the importance of quarries in the MENDIPs. It talks about the amount of CO2 that was emitted through road freight in the region. So there's over 1.5 million tons of CO2. If you reduce that empty running by a quarter, there's significant decarbonisation benefits to be had. And this will obviously be of interest to central government. Just a quick jump around some of the key issues that were identified through the work. The Southwest as a region, compared to a lot of the rest of the country, is quite dependent on road-based freight, and that's a problem nationally because of lorry driver shortage, issues related to road congestion. I've mentioned already that the Southwest SRN, that's the strategic road network, is slightly less developed than the rest of the country, especially areas like the Midlands, for example. Road freight is getting cleaner, but it's still got very high pollution levels. There's the availability of electric charging infrastructure for larger vehicles is still poor. So that's a key issue for the medium to long term. There's some issues over the role of STBs. Hopefully we'll take a greater role in transitioning to a decarbonised freight network as we move on. The work identified that the Southwest has a number of commercial ports with spare capacity. So there's definitely some opportunities for transitioning away from road-based freight. Airports in the Southwest particularly focused on passenger traffic. Minimal tonnage is going by air. So that aviation has potential for increase as well. The work has also identified there's a lack of active freight terminals for rail, and that's a significant barrier. Moving on to some of the interventions, how we did that, I've set out in the report that the strategy ultimately proposes 46 interventions, and they're packaged into six key themes. They're on the left of this slide. And they're also split into 5 different modes. We've got road, rail, maritime, aviation, and other. And with that, that's all factored down into a number of intervention packages, which are on your screen. And just to give you a quick example, As we move towards the end, this has a map from towards the end of towards the conclusion of the freight strategy, which looks at indicative locations for potential intermodal rail freight terminals across the whole of the southwest, so from Western Gateway right down into the peninsula. Those are indicative. One of the other key recommendations from the strategy is to incorporate a freight steering group. The purpose of that group will be to discuss and prioritise in partnership with industry and other key agencies from the public sector what the key freight priorities should be for the region. And we're proposing that this group should comprise board members from both STBs. We have agreed on an interim basis that this group is going to be chaired by Jim Stewart, who's given us apologies today. Jim is the Chief Executive of Poole Harbour Commissioners, and he is also the chair of the Western Gateway STB's Transport and Business Forum. And we're currently drawing up a terms of reference for that. And obviously it will be for the membership to determine and agree that. And we propose that group to meet biannually, probably the first inaugural, the inaugural meeting in the summer at some time. But this is a really good opportunity to bring together the expertise of the private sector and some of the decision makers from the public sector, so that we can really start to prioritise and start developing business cases for some of the interventions that are within the strategy. And with the time constraints in mind, I think that's all I wanted to say. I do have Jeff from AECOM with me. So if anyone has any technical questions related to the strategy, I might defer to Jeff, but I'd also just like to take the opportunity to thank Jeff and the team at AECOM for producing an excellent piece of work. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan. To be honest, I would doubt there will be that many questions, because apart from thanking Manda for Councillor Rigby for her work on this, I'd like to echo her words about the strategy itself. I genuinely believe that it should be a blueprint for how you can take a really wide-ranging and multifaceted topic and bring it together in an understandable and particularly a logical way to form a strategy. I think it's an exceptionally good paper, and I would like to thank everyone who's involved in that. There is a question from Don Davies.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for the presentation. As somebody who works in freight for far too many years, I recognise the fact about vehicles running empty. I think there's an issue around how we could better utilise the capacity. I guess one is to blow the trumpet for my own local port, Bristol Port, in terms of the work they've been doing, particularly with Hinkley Point, and indeed other projects of using maritime to move heavy freight down to the site at Hinkley Point. And they've done other projects where they've consolidated and moved heavy freight. So I do think we perhaps could learn quite a lot from how they managed to deliver that to other examples. I guess the one elephant in the room that's not really been addressed with this strategy, and I don't really know how to do it, is the single point of failure of our transport network in the southwest. I.e., we've basically got one railway line and one road. If the M5 has any level of failure, we as a region are extremely hard pressed, and as demonstrated when we had the storms at Dawlish, our mainline freight capacity is extremely exposed as well to outside events. So I do wonder what we can do in terms of future-proofing our network. I know it's very, very difficult. We don't necessarily want to be building more roads, but I didn't really say anything in the strategy about other ways of moving things, because I think that it is a concern to me that moving forward, we could have some significant economic problems for quite long periods if either of those freight routes are out of commission.
Thanks, Don. I think the point about learning from areas of excellence, such as the Hinkley Point work, is something that I hope would be taken on board. But I don't know whether Ewan, are you able to briefly answer about the single point of failure on either the road or nail network?
Yep. Yes, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. I would acknowledge that resilience on the strategic road network and obviously the limited rail network is obviously an issue, but I mean, Network Rail have undertaken a significant amount of work around the Dawlish area to improve that resilience. And I suppose there are other studies that are ongoing, particularly with the national highways at the moment. There is the M4 to Dorset Coast study as part of Roads Investment Strategy 2, which has journey times, but also resilience as one of its key objectives to improve, to reduce that dependency on the M5, as you've stated. But it is acknowledged that the issues you raise are massive issues for the Southwest, and I suppose the Freight Steering Group is likely to identify some of these constraints and prioritise interventions accordingly. And I perhaps ask Jeff if you've got any further comments on that. Thanks.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Ewan. Yeah, thanks for your question, Don. It really is an important one, and resilience is very important to many of the big organisations. I think I would refer you back to a statement from Tesco's that was made earlier on this year, which is why they've started to put a lot more of their freight on the railway, that they recognise that actually in periods of difficulty, actually moving goods by more than one mode gives them actually better resilience in the network. And as both you and me are ex-freight operators, we know how important it is to make sure the goods get there and find an alternative. So I think it's not just an infrastructure thing, it's actually putting your eggs in several baskets to try and spread that around. And I think some companies are better at it than another, but there's still a lot to be done, I would recognise.
Thank you both. I'm going to ask Amanda to move the recommendations in a second, if that's okay. But I just need a clarification on the change to recommendation 1. It's going to be changed to delegate the approval of the freight strategy, and I don't know whether it needs to be to specific officers or to specific members in collaboration with, etc. Because obviously in a local authority, it would be to somebody in a particular post, Director of Transportation and Engineering, for example. So I don't know how we word this one, unless, and again, Nuala or Sarah may be able to help. The only wording I can think of that makes sense at the moment is delegate approval of the freight strategy to the chair and the lead member for freight in collaboration with the relevant officers and subject only to minor revisions. Yeah, Nuala, that works then, yeah? Okay, fantastic. Manda, are you subject to that? Are you happy to move the resolutions and the recommendations, and I'll second them?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, can I just say thank you, not only to the officers for the work they've done, but the help they've given me in getting up to speed with this. I felt sufficiently relaxed in front of them to ask what I considered the silly questions, as in what are we defining as freight, which actually provoked a really interesting conversation. So I'm very, very much looking forward to being part of this, and I so move, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I second those recommendations. As before, if we can just see anyone who can indicate if they dissent. Otherwise, we'll take that as approved unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to the officers and consultants involved in that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If we now move on then to Craig Dennon, who's going to be giving us an update on the Strategic Transport Plan Phase 1. Members will remember that this came before us informally a few months ago, and we felt that additional work was needed on it. That additional work has been going on, and we agreed that we would be taking offline the final structuring of that Phase 1. And Craig, if we can ask you to update us on that, and also on the plans for Phase 2, if you don't mind me saying as briefly as possible.
I will be as brief as possible, because I know I'm 1 minute over my allotted time in any case.
Thank you.
So a brief update of where we have got to. There are 3 phases to the production of the Strategic Transport Plan. We're coming to the close of Phase 1, which was the starting point for developing that evidence base and background information. So that has involved the gathering and analysis of a robust evidence base. So that identifies existing potential future constraints and opportunities. It seeks to provide that evidence base to realise Western Gateway's goals, and also provides that high-level review of the strategic transport network provision for connecting areas of economic activity. So in terms of where we're going with this, there are reports at the moment in draft form which seek to get that evidence base for the 4 strategic corridors that we have got at the moment, which is Midlands to South Coast, Midlands to South West, South East to Wales, and South East to South West. So that is going on. So those reports are split into having information on the demographic data, so population, etc., economic profiles, so gross value added, where all that information is, the environmental data, so where environmental constraints are within Western Gateway, which may influence what happens in a strategic transport plan, existing travel issues, and then current and planned growth. Now, alongside that phase 1 work, there has been the production of a Western Gateway specific strategic transport model, and a model development report was produced and issued to National Highways for their views and comments, and National Highways have accepted the use of that transport model to undertake the phase 2 technical assessment work. So that will give us the opportunity to look at the forecast year impact on the existing road network with committed developments, committed infrastructure, and then overlay the proposed improvements for the strategic transport plan, and then see what the impact on the road network is. Which then leads me into the phase 2 technical assessment work, which is ongoing at the moment. So that will use the Western Gateway strategic transport model to provide the outputs, which will form the evidence base to analyse the impacts of the strategic transport plan across the region. Alongside that, there is a transport decarbonisation model. There already is one at the moment, but that was based on a number of different data sources from each of the constituent local authorities. Now we are updating that so that, and using information from the Western Gateway strategic transport model, so that provides a standardised information across the whole of the Western Gateway. So that is being updated at the moment as well. In terms of going forward for the programme, we're looking to June this year for the issue of information on a do something business as usual to the senior officers group for review and comment. End of July, beginning of August, the issue of information for the emerging forecast to SOG for review and comment. Then October 2022 will be presentation of the phase 2 results. And at that point, we'll be seeking approval for consultation on the strategic transport plan. I hope that was brief enough.
That was excellent. Just to confirm, we're talking September 22 as the presentation to this board.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm the lead member on the road network, and Craig and others have obviously been keeping me up to date, and I hope that will continue as we develop, because I will want to be bringing other members involved to ensure that when we come forward at the September with that plan, that everybody is well cited on it, and that we know that members have agreed around the Western Gateway area that everything is pointing in the right direction. So, thank you very much for that. Do we have any other? We don't have any recommendations on this, obviously, at the moment. Do any other members have anything they'd like to bring up at this point, or should we wait until we maybe might be the next meeting or offline, that there'll be some more stuff to be able to distribute around? And I understand, Craig, that had we had more time, we maybe have been looking at a presentation. So maybe it would be a good idea to send that around to all the board members, so we have the opportunity to look at it and to bring up any ideas amongst ourselves that we may have.
Yeah, I will do. And just one other point from myself, we have set up sort of fortnightly progress calls with Nuala and James White on this as well.
That's great, and thank you very much, Nuala and James, for keeping an eye on this and ensuring that it comes to me and then on to other members at the appropriate stages. So thank you very much, and thanks for being so brief on that one, Craig.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're now going to move on to two papers which are basically rail related. Our lead member for rail has had to give apologies today, although I understand that the person who's substituting for him at the moment, Councillor Daly, has been present at some of those meetings. But the first is on the rail strategy investment, and the second one is around the parking policy. So actually we'll just take them the one at a time, and our lead members have been working mostly with yourself, James White. So if you can bring us into that first paper on rail strategy investment, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the first report is about the rail strategy and where we are in terms of the funding that the Western Gateway has been provided. Plus, there's some other updates related to the rail strategy within it as well. Members will hopefully recall that we had a budget of £65,000 for 21-22 for the rail strategy, and this was going to be put into undertaking a station audit. However, the William Shapps plan, when it came out last May, included proposals to do a national station audit. So that rather superseded the need for the Western Gateway to do its own piece of work. So the funding was refocused on taking forward the outputs from Network Rail strategic corridor studies, and the recommendation was to take forward the outputs which have come out of the Bristol to Birmingham strategic corridor study and the Bristol to Exeter corridor study. And following discussions with Network Rail, we've focused on a number of measures, and so as not to spread the 65,000 too thinly, decision was taken that the Western Gateway would focus on developing designs and feasibility for Cheltenham Spa Station, whilst Network Rail would pick up proposals for Gloucester Station, Westerly Junction, which is the main junction between Bristol and Birmingham, and for the Exeter to Bristol corridor, looking at tracking between Bristol Temple Meads and Parsons Street. And in terms of Cheltenham Spa, this is the piece of work the Western Gateway is funding. It's coming up with proposals for a new south-facing bay platform. And as with all the measures that are being put forward, these are very much sort of the first steps towards increasing the capacity of the network to enable the enhanced levels of services that the strategic studies are recommending. I had hoped to be able to share a bit more with you today on Cheltenham Spa, but unfortunately the work is about 1 to 2 weeks behind schedule. But we should have something within the next week or so. There was more work to do on bringing together the designs and need to go through Network Rail's assurance process as well. But I think it's an interesting scheme. It should improve the capacity to enable additional services to go in and out of Cheltenham Spa, and it will improve the overall reliability and performance of the station. With Gloucester, it's a case of whether to build a new platform to the north or the south of the existing station. Again, this opens up the capacity, particularly needed for the study's recommendation for 4 trains an hour between Bristol and Gloucester, but there are some land ownership issues to resolve around those schemes, and issues around capacity in the station as a whole. I won't say much about the other schemes because they're still very much under development, but I would hope, Chair, to be able to bring more detailed information back to the next board meeting. There are a lot of other studies going on undertaken by Network Rail, and they're listed in the report in section 3. There's some studies which have already been completed or just completed, like the Dorset strategic connectivity one, and previously the West of England line one as well. Whilst there's other ones still under development, in particular the Greater Bristol area one, and the Southwest Main Line one as well. And I think Daniel in his update note has also listed those studies. So there is the potential, subject to the board's approval, to take forward some of the outputs coming from these studies, to take forward outputs from those studies, to be paid for, funded from this year's budget or part of that 3-year programme. I would hope that the work we've been undertaking with Network Rail, with Cheltenham Spa, has demonstrated the value of the Western Gateway being involved and acting as, in a sense, a catalyst for taking these measures forward. So yes, I just draw members' attention to the list of other studies where there is this potential to put more investment in this financial year or as part of the next 3 years. I'd also just like to flag up about the East-West Main Line. The Western Gateway is now a member of the East-West Main Line Partnership. I went to their board a couple of weeks ago and gave a presentation, and there was good feedback on the need to look westwards as well as looking eastwards. East-West Main Line is looking at Oxford seeing an awful lot between Oxford and Cambridge. We're also looking beyond to Norwich and Ipswich. But looking in the other direction, there is our rail strategy, which has flagged up the importance of links between Bristol and Oxford, but also the south coast to Oxford as well. One or two other things I'll just quickly flag up. We have a commitment to have 5 rail task forces. This came out of the rail strategy. That has proved very challenging to do in terms of the resources that's available to the Western Gateway and to each of your authorities. So the proposal here is to focus it down on a single task force, which will be based around the existing rail officer group, which brings in officers from all of your local authorities, and then set up ad hoc subgroups as and when the need is required. And this is a more pragmatic approach really towards the level of resources that are available, but we do have a lot of expertise within that rail officer group, so I think this is it's a sensible way forward. One other thing I'd just like to quickly flag up is there's a piece of work being undertaken by the other Western Gateway body. This is the sort of the economic partnership, which covers South Wales and overlaps partly into the Western Gateway geography. They've commissioned consultants to undertake a piece of work mapping out rail aspirations to 2050, and this brings in organisations like Cardiff City Region, Swansea, Transport for Wales, the Midlands Connect Subnational Transport Body, the West of England Combined Authority, and the Western Gateway. And as an officer working group, I'm representing the Western Gateway on that group, and so very much pushing the Western Gateway rail strategy side of things. I think that was all I wanted to cover, Chair, unless I've missed anything. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, James. I think that's very comprehensive and encouraging. Please do keep pushing the Western Gateway rail strategy there. I would be, the one thing that I would say is I'd be slightly scared that it could get swallowed up a little bit as we start to move just even a bit too far west into some of Wales, where we have an awful lot of economic reliance on the strategies here. So I hope that will be the case. I am also encouraged by the idea of reducing down the number of task forces. I think the point when we put that rail strategy together was it was the work streams rather than the task forces that we were trying to concentrate on. So as long as those streams are still continuing as streams of work, then that's something that I would be very, very happy with. And indeed, it's one of the recommendations a little bit broader than that. I've got Councillor Steve Reid, just quickly, if that's okay.
Yeah, very quickly. James, thank you for that. Westerly Junction is a pinch point, and you recognise in the paper that it's a solution that needs the industry and government. What I would ask is that you keep it in these papers for future reference, so that we don't lose sight of it, so we can take every opportunity to promote a solution there, because it is a significant pinch point for travel and to the north. Thank you, James.
Thank you. Is that noted, James, and noted, agreed? It
is, yes, completely agreed. Very good point. Thank you, Councillor.
Super. Thank you very much. In that case, we do have the recommendations in front of us, 4 of those. Councillor Daly, I know you've been working with Councillor McLennan on this, the lead member. Are you happy to move those recommendations?
Yes, quite happy, Mike. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. In which case, I shall second those. And again, if any member would want to indicate dissent. No, in that case, that has been passed unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. So we now move on for the final paper that we've got. Back to yourself, James. And this is the rail strategy. And members will remember the adopted strategy as it was at the time looked at the percentages of passenger flow that needed to be provided as with parking spaces at the various different types of railway station, moving from sort of minor through to major network hubs. And we were ended up with some fairly bizarre numbers that were coming where again, I can't remember the exact number, but I think Bath railway station, we needed something like 16 or 1700 car parking spaces, and we realised that the percentages just weren't working, and we needed something that was a little bit more bespoke to each station. So you went away, I think, on that and come back with some differing recommendations, James.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we did. We went away, and as requested, the rail officer went through each of our I think it's 76 stations in the Western Gateway area. Went through each of them on a case by case basis and reviewed whether or not there was a need for additional parking. And as a result of that review, we've concluded, and it's included in the report, a list of 10 stations where there is potentially a need to increase the number of spaces. These are stations which have a wider catchment area, serve quite large and particularly actually rural areas as well. So they act as sort of regional hubs where going by car is often going to be the only way to get to or from these stations, but also stations where there's going to be a lot of development, or potentially a lot of development taking place in and around those areas. So there's a list of 10 which met that criteria, plus another 3 stations which we recommend should be kept under review, because things may well change with those. I will just very quickly list the 10 stations. That's Ashchurch, Cannon-Dursley, Gillingham, Moreton-in-the-Marsh, Nailsea and Backwell, Patchwell, Severn Beach, Worl, Yate and Yatton. And the 3 to be kept under review are Poole, Warminster and Weymouth. So the policy, the proposed revisions to the policy are in the report, removing that one-size-fits-all approach and leaving far more flexibility around looking at stations on that case by case basis. We need to make changes to the actual document, so the recommendations are just around the delegation to make those changes contained in the report. But I hope this comes across as very much a realistic approach to parking. And I've just checked, Chair, that it was actually 3,892 spaces at Bath Spa.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, James. Yeah, absolutely. This is the pragmatic approach that we were after. And just to just for clarity, there were previously different percentages that were mandated effectively for national hubs, regional hubs, and for local hubs. based on passenger numbers. And the wording now that we put in is that percent will be dependent on the station role as a gateway railhead. So giving that sort of flexibility. The percentage of those car spaces that will either be needed to be or will need to be given over for disabled parking, and also the percentage of those car parking spaces that will need to be served by electric vehicle charging points, and the percentage of those car parking spaces which will need to be matched by cycle parking spaces as well, remain unchanged from the original strategy. So I think we'd be very happy with certainly I'd be very happy with those. Councillor Steve Reid.
Yeah, James, only point 7 beach. The sentence there is past tense. Can I ask that you speak to SGC officers and ask for an update before you publish?
Right, will do. Yep.
Can we accept then that point will be taken on before the final publication? I think the paper does give us that. The recommendations do give us that little bit of flexibility that when it says it delegates to the Western Gateway programme team to make the appropriate changes. If we can note just at this meeting that appropriate change may also include reference to 7 Beach. Yeah, thank you. If there are no more members wishing to contribute to this, then I will again thank you, James, and officers for making the relevant changes so that these are now dependent on the individual stations. And again, maybe Kevin, are you happy to propose this one in Mark's absence?
Yes, quite happy, Mike. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will second them and ask members if anyone wants to indicate dissent. No, in that case, that is also passed unanimously. So thank you very much indeed. The last item on the agenda is any other business which has been previously advised to me. I have received none. And so unless there are any urgent items to bring up, then we will keep that at none, to say that the next meeting is going to take place on the 22nd of June. I'm afraid I have to, it does say on there that the board will decide whether to hold it in person or as a virtual meeting. In my case, I'm afraid it has to be virtual. So I hope that that's okay with people, and we can move from there. So thank you everybody for your contributions. Thank you particularly for keeping in time, which I thought was going to be a challenge to say the least, but we've managed it. And with that, I will close the meeting. Thank you again. Bye-bye.